Welcome back, everybody. If you're new, my name's Nicholas, and this is Investing Against the Grain. First of all, for those of you celebrating Easter today, happy Easter to all of you. If you're not, I hope you're enjoying your Sunday. Hopefully you had a good weekend up to this point. I want to give a special shout out to two new Patreon members, John Elise and David Williams. Thank you both so much. I appreciate the contribution. And for anyone else out there, if you would like to help support the channel and contribute, you can find my Patreon link down below. Now, today's video, we are going to talk about Elon Musk's recent TED Talk up in Canada. Now, I've talked about this a few times, saying that I want a chance to digest it and watch it a couple times and really extrapolate what I thought was important, what was said. And there was a lot of good stuff in this. So in today's episode, we're going to break this down into a few different categories and topics. We're going to talk about predictions, essentially Elon's thought when it comes to full self-driving, Optimus, just in general, how he sees things and why he's good or bad at predicting. We're going to talk about the importance of Optimus, okay, and what does that mean and where we're at with that and how Elon truly sees this. We're going to talk about something that may seem a little controversial to some of you. We're going to talk about free speech, and we're going to talk about Twitter. Right? They kind of go hand in hand right now with everything that's going on. So we're going to touch on that, and you're going to get my thoughts on it. Again, this is all stream of consciousness, so be aware of that. We'll touch on some fundy secured and SEC conversations in more detail that I hadn't heard up until this point that Elon kind of unveiled. And this kind of goes into some other topics as well. And finally, stick to the end, because I think the most important part of the entire TED Talk that Elon was on happen at the very end. And I'm going to give the most important part, in my opinion, is as a stock investor. I'm going to give my thoughts about what he said, and something that I think a lot of people just kind of glossed over, but Elon seemed to be saying exactly what's going to happen moving forward to all of us. So I don't know how long this is going to be, but we have a lot to cover, so let's just jump into it. Before we do that, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring that bell. Again, you can find my Patreon link down below, along with my Twitter and our merchandise store. You can find all of that down below in the description. All right, let's get into all of these amazing topics. One of the first things that were discussed during this interview was a question regarding Elon's ability to be so good at predicting certain things, yet arguably very bad at other things. Here's an example. In 2014, Elon Musk predicted that by 2020, Tesla would deliver 500,000 vehicles. At the time, everybody was saying this is not happening. You'd have to be opening 3 new gigafactories every single year, or a new gigafactory every single quarter. The numbers would just be impossible. That no company manufacturing, selling anything has ever been able to scale from where they were in 2014 to where they want to get to in 2020. It's never been done with any product of any kind. Guess what? It happened almost to the T. I think it was like 499,000 vehicles they delivered, right? So Elon was somehow so dead nuts accurate on this, predicting this 6 years in advance. Now, let's contrast that. Full self-driving. We've all seen all of the Tesla Q, all the Tesla haters out there with their little memes and their videos over and over saying, oh, it's going to happen in 2 years. Oh, next year. Oh, next year. Oh, next year. And then here he is now, first in this last year, saying it on the Lex Friedman podcast, saying that he thinks it's going to happen this year. And so the question posed to Elon is, why are you right with some things and why are you wrong with other things? And Elon had something that I think is very telling and something that you won't see anywhere out there. We're going to talk about free speech here in a second, but CNN, Fox, MSNBC, other CEOs, people you probably work with, managers, bosses you might have, friends of yours, spouses potentially. People have an issue saying that they're not always right. There's something about the human condition that we feel that we must always be right, and we find it almost painful and agonizing to think that maybe we're not always right. And so I thought it was very telling that Elon Musk, the person that so many people want to hate, has the ability and the humility to say, I am not always right. This is something we don't see from a lot of people, let alone CEOs or anyone. So that was essentially his answer to, why are his predictions not always accurate? And it's that simple. He's not always right. He does his best. He makes his best prediction, but they don't always land. Now, with regards to full self-driving, which is really arguably the one thing that Elon's been off when it comes to timing or predictions, what he did was he used the analogy of a log curve. So we all understand what an exponential curve looks like, right? A log curve is a little different. A log curve is essentially the inverse of an exponential function. Or in other words, what it looks like is it kind of comes up and then it starts to plateau. Now, what happens is that whenever you get that plateau, you have diminishing returns, right? Yes, are you technically improving or going up, even on a log curve? Yes, sure. But it starts to essentially tail off to being zero. Now, the same thing is happening with FSD or what other people are doing, Waymo, Cruise, etc. And what Elon is saying is that the approach that everybody's taking, they will eventually learn that they're hitting a plateau. They're hitting that logarithmic function of a graph where they're going to start getting diminishing returns, right? You hit a ceiling. And so because of that, FSD is taking longer than expected. Now, in general, you don't know you're hitting a ceiling until you hit that ceiling, right? You get to a point where you realize that you're not getting a lot of returns or a lot of improvements, diminishing returns. And that's when you have to rethink what you're doing. How can I change things? What can I do to throw a new variable or a new factor into this to get back into that more exponential rate of return or the exponential change in progress with full self-driving. And so what Elon describes it is that, you start off and it's that logarithmic curve, right? You think you're doing well, boom, plateau. All right, so you make some changes. Okay, hey, look, we're doing again. We're going up. Oh, another plateau, another change, more changes need to happen. So we need to continue to iterate and iterate. What he's saying now, though, is that he is pretty convinced, and to quote Elon, this is potentially famous last words, that he thinks this year they will solve it. They will, and when he says solve, he's very clear to use his words with nuance. He says that he believes they will reach FSD, full self-driving, at levels that are safer than a human, right? So safer than a human. Doesn't mean 10x better than a human. Doesn't mean 1,000 better than a human, but just safer than a human. And at that point really is when we should probably be doing a exchange of keys from us to FSD, because if FSD can be safer than a human, well, it's safer than a human. That means we can save lives, prevent crashes, prevent people from having to go through financial burdens, etc. I mean, just yesterday, me and my fiance driving 3 blocks from our house, right? We drove, we had an appointment, we dealt with the appointment, but coming back, we saw a vehicle accident. I just got done telling you about a T-bone that happened where I had to help that lady out of her car by ripping the door open. Well, again, another T-bone just 3 blocks away from our house. This is insane. People, we have to get on the other side of this. We're so close. It'd be honestly criminal not to progress with this. So going back to full self-driving, what Elon also goes on to say is that what he didn't realize from the beginning, which essentially, was something that he couldn't know, right? He had blinders on. But then he got to a point where he realized that, and that's not just him, it's the entire team, right? It's not just Elon, but we use Elon because he's the head figure. And it's not even just Andre Karpathy, right? There's so many other people involved with the team. But what they realize is they need to solve real-world AI, real-world vision in order to solve full self-driving. And so ever since then, that has been their direction. And we've all seen all of the crazy improvements that have been coming out lately. And this is before we even get to version 11. Again, just to iterate what Elon said, this is his prediction by the end of the year. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. Doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but he believes it'll happen. And again, knock on wood, he said famous last words. So before anybody else starts taking that and clipping it to be yet another meme, another Tesla Q video, look, the guy is the team, the company. They're trying to solve a problem that's never been solved. They're embarking on a new mission. This is no different than trying to get to the moon for the first time. Right, we can estimate and have proximity, but to absolutely nail a date, it's not like production of vehicles where we know what it takes to go in. Like, there's no real technological advancements that have to really happen there, right? Once we produce a vehicle, it's more just about the engineering of it. Right now with FSD, it's more about how do we solve this? How do we solve real world AI? We need ideas. We need new ways of thinking about things. And Elon at this point believes we're there. It's just a matter of iterating, and we'll get there by the end of the year. All right, so that was pretty much all that was talked about full self-driving and predictions. But then that naturally had a nice transition into talking about Optimus, the humanoid. If you're not aware, Tesla is building a humanoid robot called Optimus Subprime. Now, the interviewer, I forget his name, but the interviewer started off by asking Elon On your quarterly earnings call, you said that this is arguably the most important project that we're working on this year. Elon truly believes in this, right? What he said was he essentially had a moment, right? So once they realized that they had to solve real world AI for FSD, what they realized was, okay, well, what's it take to create humanoids? Well, you need specialized actuators. You're going to need real artificial intelligence for the real world. You're going to need mass manufacturing. And these are all things that, guess what, Tesla is really good at. So I remember I had this, again, this is how you know stream of consciousness. I had this biology teacher when I was in ninth grade. And it was one of those teachers that you absolutely hate, but when you look back and towards the end of the year, you realize that this was probably one of the most profound teachers you ever had in your life. But Mr. Gar, I'll never forget. He's one of those teachers that taught me how to learn, and I hated him every step of the way. But it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me for my life was meeting him and being under his tutelage. But Mr. Gar, I remember him saying to us very consequentially, he's talking about biology, but he was saying things happen at the right time when a situation is essentially in an environment ready to happen. Right, so whether it's single-celled organisms or how we went from being water creatures to how we evolved onto land, even if you don't believe in evolution or any of that, but the idea is the right set of circumstances, the right set of technologies come together, and then that can develop into the new thing. So what am I saying here? Well, you have Tesla that does a lot of their own actuators. You have Tesla that is learning how to manufacture like no one else. And you have Tesla who's trying to solve FSD, and that's leading into the ability to have real world AI perception and everything. So when you take all of those, it's just a series of the right environment, the right little biosphere that you're creating to be able to create this new thing. And that new thing is Optimus, right? It's just a series of fortunate events, and that's what's happening here. It's so funny. Every time I see with Tesla, it just always flashes back to me about Mr. Gar's biology class, which, again, hated the man, but loved the man by the end of the year. So, I highly doubt he's watching. I don't even know if he's alive anymore, but thank you, Mr. Gar, for all you ever did. All right, getting back to Optimus. Elon goes on to say something that we've heard him say a few times now. And he said, quote, "People have no idea. This will be bigger than the car." And if you think about it, my models alone, right? My models, we get to 3, 5, 10, $15 trillion in market cap. And all I'm really basing this off is just vehicle production. I'm not even including FSD yet. And Elon feels this strongly about Optimus. Now, to be fair and to be, unbiased, Elon also said this about batteries and, the electric side, right? Tesla Energy. And though it hasn't happened, so we don't know if he's right or wrong, it hasn't happened yet. So for him to say this about Optimus, it's fair to think that there could be some skepticism out there or even the thought of, okay, well, when, right? So, but let's say he's right. And we already, at least if you were to go with my price targets or even forget mine, look at ARK Invest. They're saying potentially, right, on the bullish side, potentially $6,000 a share, $5,800 by 2026 for Tesla. That is only for the electric vehicles and FSD. That's not including energy. It's not including Optimus. It's so hard. I meet so many people, and they just don't seem to understand the scale of Tesla. People ask me oh, well, when are you going to talk about another stock or another company? I want to know what else to invest in. And it's like, guys, I don't think you understand. I constantly look to see if there's anything out there. I don't want blinders on, but I don't see anything even close to innovating, iterating, or with potential total addressable markets that come even close to all of the business segments Tesla has within it. All right, it's just unbelievable. So I try to get this message out as much as I can because I don't want other people to miss out. I really don't. I don't want people to be sitting there thinking, oh, man, if I would have only bought Google back in 2005, oh, man, if I would have bought Amazon, whatever, if I would have bought Apple, that's a horrible place to be in. You hate that. Sit there and have to look back and be like, man, I could have made so much money if I would have just done this. So I try to tell as many people as I can. It can't hurt, right? It's like I'm trying to spread the message hey, big things are happening, right? This is revolutionary. We're literally going from a internal combustion engine paradigm into electric vehicles. This is like the agricultural revolution. This is like the industrial revolution. This is a big deal. All right, I don't want to go too far into a tangent here. I thought it was very interesting some of the examples Elon gave as far as what the Tesla bot could do. He talked about making you dinner. He talked about mowing the lawn, right? So it's interesting to see that Elon is potentially thinking about having this for household activities. Now, something that I thought, I don't want to bash on the interviewer because I think we can all critique different people and we always think, oh, I would have asked this or I would have done that. And it's very easy to criticize someone else. But in general, I mean, the interview was good. I wish the interviewer would have asked some other questions. I'm biased. I come from a technical background, so that's more towards where more my leaning would be. I have a proclivity to ask more technical questions, so it's good to have a balance. But again, it wasn't the most to my liking. But one thing that I loved that the interviewer asked or pointed out, which is something I didn't even think about, was, and it's not that revolutionary, but this idea that if you had a humanoid in your house, the idea that essentially the bot could map your entire house and know where every single thing belongs and where every single thing is, right? We see those Apple tags or those tiles where people used to track, their bags or their wallets or whatever. Well, imagine if you had a bot that knew where every single thing in your house was at all times and where it was, and you could just say, "Hey, bot, where did I put my keys? Or can you grab this for me?" That would be pretty amazing. I mean, there's a lot of implications for this, right? From clean your house to you lost something to, hey, can you run back to the house and grab this for me? I mean, it's just to think about what this could mean. I thought it was just, I don't know, my mind kind of went down a rabbit hole. So I encourage you to think about this for a second. It'd be pretty fun to just extrapolate on what this could mean and what cool things could become of this. And then a timeline was asked for this, and Elon pretty much just regurgitated what he said before as far as timeline. He said that he thinks that they'll have, something interesting prototype maybe by the end of this year. And, next year they'll have, a prototype that can do something, handle like dangerous jobs, potentially, dangerous, boring, mundane tasks people don't want to do. To me, that very clearly sounds like jobs for inside of the factories. So imagine, there's a job, a specific task that people tend to get injured at whenever, they're working in the factories. If Tesla could train the humanoid to do that task, I mean, how amazing would that be, right? I mean, to essentially get to zero injury a climate. And factories are very dangerous. So if we could get to that, that'd be pretty impressive. But then I think, his whole point was that timeline looks like about 2 years. So I think that's pretty bullish. So final thoughts on Optimus with regards to this interview. Elon said that it'll definitely cost less than the vehicle, so I think that's pretty exciting for all of us. So what does that mean? Vehicles have different ranges, but at the very least, we know they'll be under 100,000. So that's kind of awesome. And then the interviewer, it's funny to see how some people think, because I don't think the interviewer understood how this would probably work. So what they said was, well, imagine if somebody could, pay for a one-time cost $25,000 for the bot, and then they could replace a $30,000-$40,000 employee in perpetuity. Well, I don't think that's how this would work, or that's what the economic model would be. I'm pretty sure you would probably buy the hardware and then you'd have a subscription attached to the hardware, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to update the software. You're going to be updating with more features. And I think that's where we'll go. Same with full self-driving. I think it'll be inevitable where full self-driving either won't be sold or it'll be purely only a subscription service. So I think he kind of is missing the boat on this and why this could be so big. It's not just the volume of bots you can make, but it's the recurring income you could get from it. All right, let's transition into potentially something that'll be controversial for some of you. Hopefully it's not, because I really don't think that this should be a controversial topic. I think this should be a pretty agreeable topic with a lot of us, but we're going to talk about free speech and we're going to talk about Twitter. So Elon was asked, why did you make a bid for Twitter? And to quote Elon, he said, "It's important that it be an inclusive arena for free speech. Twitter has become the de facto town square. People should have the reality and perception that they can speak freely within the purview of the law." So those are interesting words. Should have the reality, so it means it should be a fact, but then the perception should be there as well, right? I mean, you can take a lot of these politicians who, may or may not do insider trading. Okay, the reality may be that they're not doing insider trading. However, the perception is that they are. And so both must be true, reality and perception. So I think that's a two-pillar point that a lot of people tend to mistake, right? The reality may be that there is no manipulation or over censorship or anything like that. But if it doesn't appear that way to the public, then you're expecting us just to take your word on it. And there's a fundamental issue with that, right? There's no transparency. So in other words, Elon goes on to talk about if a tweet is amplified or not amplified, people should know. Right. And again, he goes on to talk about why this is why it should be open source, the code. So think about this. Let's say a certain politician, doesn't matter what party, a certain politician wants to amplify a certain narrative. Or let's say a certain think group behind a politician to help get them elected, right? I mean, those exist, right? We all know those exist, campaigns. They decide to amplify certain things, whether it's FUD against a certain candidate or to support a benevolent message for a candidate. It should be open source. Everybody should be able to know that this is getting promoted. Whether it's getting promoted because the politician and them have some monetary way to promote it, or if it's just part of the algorithm. Either way, we should be able to understand and see why, how, and when these things are being promoted. That's full transparency. And the bigger idea here is that this is fundamental to a good democracy, especially in the United States. The United States is the heart of democracy in the world right now. And it's not just important for us to have it, but if we have it and we do things a certain way, well, then we can lead by example. So it's more important than just the United States. It's important to the idea of democracy as a whole. Elon went on to say something I think was very important. And it's funny because, again, I watch CNN, MSNBC, Fox, etc. I mean, you pick the news channel, you pick the organization, you pick the YouTube news channel, it doesn't matter. It seems like they all have a certain spin on it. Oh, this billionaire wants to buy Twitter. And I was happy Elon addressed this. This is not a way to make money. This is my strong intuitive sense that a public platform that is maximally trusted and inclusive is important. So again, this is all about transparency and inclusiveness, not to exclude anybody, but to allow people. That's what he wants, right? Again, he's not here to make a single penny, right? If he wanted to make money, I'm telling you, he wouldn't be putting money into anything else. But this is bigger than that. This is more about what he feels in his heart, what he feels in his intuition, about the importance about being able to say what you believe without being censored or stymied in any way. And then we have what the classic narrative, all right? It's like when you hear somebody say they don't want to get the COVID vaccine for whatever reason. All of a sudden you get, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. It's like, no, that's not what that means. Like, one does not equate to the other. Maybe they just don't want the COVID vaccine, right? Or you hear someone say a certain bias towards something, or you hear someone's a Republican, right? Or a libertarian. Oh, well, you're racist, right? We tend to just go to these extremes for some reason. And so with Elon, the interviewer asked, you say you're a free speech absolutist, so people can say anything just because he's a free speech absolutist. And no, that's not the case. Like, again, nuance matters, right? Just because you don't want the COVID vaccine doesn't mean you're anti-vaxxer. Just because you're a Republican or a libertarian, it does not mean that you're a racist. And same with the other way. Just because you're a liberal Democrat, it doesn't mean you're a Marxist or you're the Stalin lover socialist. Like, we just want to, for some reason, box people into all these different compartments without looking at the nuance of it. Look, Elon responds to this by saying that Twitter should abide by the rules of a given country, that inciting violence is illegal and should be illegal, right? Whether it's on Twitter or any other medium. You can't just run to a movie theater and yell fire. Hate speech, right? Hate speech, it's something that's tricky. And Elon admits he doesn't have all the answers to everything. But what he does say is that, one, Twitter should match the laws of the given country, and that going beyond that, having things being promoted or demoted, tweets disappearing, people being banned, etc., is a problem. It really is. All right, promoting things, demoting things. This is probably a bigger problem than anything, because this is done behind the veil. All right, there's not even a paywall to be able to see what's happening. All right, it's just within internal, and they can argue this is intellectual property rights, and that's why, and they don't want other people to steal it, etc. But this is just all smoke and mirrors. Right, things are being promoted and demoted intentionally. Tweets just being deleted or disappearing, right? Who gets to say in that? It's humans. Humans are the ones that end up saying what should and shouldn't be out there. People being banned. This is a problem, right? Elon goes on to say that the code should be open source and you should be able to see it and critique it. So it's not like Elon wants to be this evil billionaire who takes over and controls everybody thinks and all that. No, quite the opposite. Yes, he's a billionaire, and what he's doing is using his wealth and all the good he's done in the world to to enact more good. He wants to take over Twitter so he can open it up, so he can allow the public, the people, the de facto town square of the people to go in and critique it. Open sourcing the code, allowing people to critique it, allowing transparency. In what world have we ever seen more transparency be an issue? Okay, all the people who are sitting there trying to control what are said or to ban people or block people. Look, I'm sorry, this is textbook. What we see from dictators, from the Hitlers to the Stalins. This is classic doublethink from the book 1984. On the one hand, you're wanting to have, this idea of inclusiveness and all that, but then if somebody doesn't say something you agree with, well, then they need to be shut down. But that's not healthy by any means. All right, that's not truly wanting to be a democracy. That's wanting to be in a dictatorship or in a communist country. And I'm not saying that communism can't potentially have some good ideas, right? Like communism, socialism, like on paper, yes, there are some things that sound very benevolent and nice, and it'd be great to have everybody uplifted. But we've never seen that happen successfully. We just haven't. Right? I mean, you hear a lot of people talk about like the Nordic countries, but there's a huge misperception there. People don't realize what's actually happening when it comes to their taxes and the things they don't get or the things we do get here. I mean, people get stuck in this certain purview of what was happening in the late 70s and 80s with these countries, and they use that as their rationale and their argument for these countries and what success looks like. Yet you'll see that a lot of these countries have actually shifted to becoming more like the United States and not less. Let's continue here. Probably the most important thing that Elon said with regards to free speech and the acquisition of Twitter and what the idea would be moving forward was the following. When in doubt, let the speech exist. So in other words, if there's a gray area, the tweet should exist. If there is a lot of controversy, you may not want to promote the tweet. That's fair. But if there's something that's a gray area, and there's something we're not really sure about, then it's best to let it stand, because letting it stand isn't going to hurt anybody, right? If anything, it'll incite more debate and questioning and critique, and I think that's healthy for us, especially in a democracy. And then Elon again goes back to, in my opinion, being humble. He says, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but we want to be aware of deleting and preventing. Timeouts are better than bans, for example. Right? I think this is very powerful. Now, before I wrap up this whole free speech Twitter segment of this video, I want to show you guys something that I thought this is very scary and very telling, in my opinion. So take a look at this. This is Yishan. Apologies if I'm butchering this. I don't know how you say your name properly. But Yishan, you can see here, founder and CEO of Terraformation, ex-Reddit, ex-Facebook, PayPal, CMU, Burger King. So he's somebody, right? I don't really know who he is, but he's somebody enough where he essentially tweeted out this long tweet thread. I mean, it's crazy long. I think it was maybe 20, 30 different tweets all in this thread. But essentially what he was saying was that Elon is in for a rude awakening. Elon doesn't understand the challenge he has ahead of him. Essentially saying that Elon doesn't know what's going to happen. He's going to get very upset. He's going to get very depressed, and he's not going to be able to make the change he wants. And that Elon is stuck in this paradigm of Internet 3.0, Internet 2.0 with regards to free speech and essentially optimism. And as I was reading this thread, something that really stood out to me was the following. So here you can see part of the tweet storm. He said, why is this link not being censored now? Hypocrisy, because the facts changed. So essentially what they're saying is this was something that was censored and now it's not. And so he goes on to say it was censored not because it was a wrong idea, but because ideas really can, at certain times and places, become lightning rods for actual physical kinetic mob behavior. This is just an unpleasant, inconvenient truth that all of you, regardless of your political leaning, need to accept about speech. Ideas really are powerful, and like anything else, this is powerful. Yes, they can be dangerous. I'm sorry, it's just true. So this to me was a little disturbing. So his point was that this was initially censored because the ideas of what this could mean, because the speech that comes with this could potentially have could become lightning rods for actual physical, kinetic, and mob behavior. All right, So your point is that we should censor ideas and thought and speech from people because it might create a riot, because it might create a protest, because it might create people to rise up. This is scary. The fact that this is somebody who I would argue probably actually has influence out there in the world thinks that this is okay. This is the reason why free speech is so important. Because if people had these ideas, which to me, this is just one potential less than a standard deviation away from being in a Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini type world. All right, it's a Putin world. It's not far from that. You're limiting what people can say. You're saying, I need to censor this because these ideas could literally lead into something that could be more provocative, whether it's, again, riots, protests, it doesn't matter. But if these ideas persisted, first of all, there would never be a MLK. There would never be a I have a dream. That was a provocative idea that led to a nation that essentially came up. The March on Washington never would have happened, ever, if this was silence. Take you back to the Arab Spring, okay? If you remember that, all the uprisings that happened in the Middle East, that happened via a cohort and a spontaneous, organic rise up through Twitter. Had this idea persisted, none of that would happen. All right, so yes, bad things can also happen, but a lot of good things can happen too. A lot of good ideas can happen. People can come together for a better cause. And people who think that they know better, people who think that they know better and how certain ideas can hurt other people, and so we must protect people from these ideas because they might react in ways that they're not aware of, that's dangerous. That is why this country exists. That is why the United States exists. That's why we have the right to free speech. That's why that is the first thing that we see. All right, that's why it's number one. Free speech matters. This is just scary to see this out there. Okay, this is very Putin-like. There's no way you can say it's not. Putin is trying to censor all social media. He's trying to, China, same thing. China's banning all social media. The Great Wall barely lets anything in or out. I mean, this type of censorship is the antithesis. It's the opposite of everything that we stand for in this country and that democracy as a whole stands for. So, I don't know if this maybe just came off wrong from him or if this wasn't what he actually meant, but the idea that you should be censoring certain stories because ideas can lead into actual action. Look, for better or for worse, at the end of the day, people should be responsible for their own actions. End of story. Okay, if somebody decides to see a certain thing and go out and riot and then they burn a police car or destroy a building, that individual is going to be held accountable for their actions. At the same time, if a group of people get together, let's say in Russia, and they rise up and they decide to overthrow Putin, same thing. Those people will be responsible for their actions. Now, in that case, those actions would probably be best for the world and for them, at least in their opinion. But we shouldn't be censoring ideas or speech just because we think that this may lead to something that isn't good. It is not anybody's job to say a protest is not good. To wrap this up, I think the Twitter free speech part of this interview, the most important thing that we took away from all of this, and you should all just take this with you today whenever you're alone with your phone in your bathroom, is that Elon wasn't lying. He does the majority of his tweets on the toilet. So if you're taking him all too seriously, and if it's affecting your day because he tweeted something, guys, ladies, people, these are just thoughts and stream of consciousness of his while he's taking a deuce. Relax. All right, it's not the end of the world. This guy's literally having a bowel movement and tweeting at the same time. All right, it's not like he's sitting there with some masterful plan on how to influence the world based on this latest tweet, and he's going to have all these ripple effects, butterfly effect, and I'm this godlike person that's moving all these puppets. Like, oh my goodness. You guys are giving him way too much. I mean, we give him a lot of credit. You people think he has way more influence than what he does when it comes to that. So just keep in mind, when you see something you don't like that he tweets, whether you don't think it's funny or whether you think it's offensive, this guy is literally, a minute away from wiping his own ass, and that's when he's tweeting these things. So take a step back. Have some, I don't know, humor, or whatever you need to do. It's not worth ruining your day over this. And again, that's the power of free speech. Moving on from free speech. I know I spent a lot of time on that one, but it's something that I think is important to cover, especially in today's day and age. And this is a Sunday video, so it's going to be longer than normal. All right. He talked about funding secured with the SEC. I thought this was amazing. A lot of the things he said I had never heard of or heard about or heard from this perspective. So I'll just kind of go through the highlights. So first he said funding was secured, and I want to be clear about that. And you could tell it was almost like he was hurting inside when this came up. He said, and the SEC knew that, and this is why he does not have respect for the San Francisco office of the SEC, because they knew this. He said they knew funding was secured, but they pursued an active investigation anyways. And the problem with that was that the bank said if Elon and Tesla did not settle with the SEC, the banks would stop lending to Tesla, right? And keep in mind, at this point, Tesla was literally on the ropes. They were tiptoeing with bankruptcy. So they were right there. And so the way Elon equated this was by saying, that's like having a gun to your child's head, right? You got to keep in mind, I mean, I know for some people this may seem drastic, but Elon took everything he's ever made, his entire life's net worth, and he divided it into two companies, into SpaceX and Tesla, both of which were on the verge of bankruptcy, all right? So his entire life up to this point was essentially spent on these companies. So to think that it wasn't all his blood, sweat, I mean, it was literally his entire life has been put into these two companies. And so whenever this threat was happening, like, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it felt to him like putting a gun to his child's head. And so he did what any parent would do. He was forced to concede. He was not going to let his pride or his humility get in the way. He put that to the side and he took it on the chin. And so what he said was, I was forced to concede to the SEC or go bankrupt. To him, it was more important to put his ego to the side than to go bankrupt. He said that I was forced to admit that I lied to save Tesla's life. And that is the only reason I conceded. He goes on to say Tesla was under the most massive short attack in the history of stock markets. In the history of stock markets. That's unbelievable. Affecting our ability to hire people, to sell cars, and they wanted Tesla to die. When you listen to Elon and you hear about this, I can't even do it justice. I mean, I highly recommend you guys watch the entire interview. I mean, obviously, I'm going to leave a link down below in the description, but you can feel the pain in his heart and his eyes, right? This was something that just felt so against who he was as a person, his character, but he put himself to the side for the betterment of Tesla. And for this reason is why he has such issues with the SEC. Again, keep in mind, he still really hasn't been convicted of doing anything wrong, right? Up to this point, there's just been an agreement between the SEC and Elon that he would get his tweets looked at if they were referencing Tesla in any way from a financial potential perspective. But now Elon's fighting that, and that's a whole other story for a whole another time. But I want to just talk about this because, again, the passion and I'm sure there's another side to the story. There's always two sides to every story. And I'm sure the SEC might come out or might have a different perspective on this. And it would be very interesting to see both parties in a room, with a moderator just to talk things out and to let us know what happened. But barring that happening, the only thing we know is the facts that are out there. And so this is just a continuation into the saga about what happened. And again, with someone like Elon, who is such a fighter and pursuer of truth, I just don't see Elon lying about this. Now, clearly I'm biased and I will be biased, obviously, unless other information comes out. But at the moment, based on the data I have right now, it does seem like the SEC was in the wrong here. And again, we've seen this over and over with the SEC, so that's just another thing, right? We've seen them do a lot of shady things and not do what they're supposed to do. How many times have we seen that with Elon? I haven't. Again, admittedly, I'm biased, but I haven't seen him do anything wrong, really. He might tweet something here and there that, isn't politically correct, though funny. but I would say I've never seen him do something wrong. I have seen the SEC do wrong things. I want to wrap this up with what I think was the most important takeaway of this entire interview. All right, and I think this pertains mainly to Tesla stockholders and something that we should all be very excited about. So I'll try not to take too long on this, but again, I do think these were the most important parts. So something that Elon said, first, it is important to understand what has Tesla actually accomplished that is most noteworthy. It's not the vehicles. It's not the 3YX Roadster. I missed one. But it's not any of those. It's not sexy. That was not the most notable thing Tesla has done. Elon instead says a auto company at mass production has not been accomplished by an American auto company in over 100 years without going bankrupt. So in other words, in the last century, there's not been a single auto company. Now, we're not even talking about EV. Not a single auto company has been started up in the US that hasn't gone bankrupt in the last century. That's a long period of time, yet Tesla has done it. He goes on to say, there have been almost 500 electric startups that went bankrupt according to Bloomberg. So not only has there not been another internal combustion engine or just auto company in general to get into mass production the last 100 years, there have been over 500 attempts from 500 different EV companies to create EVs in mass scale, in mass production, and they have all gone bankrupt. What is Tesla's most notable accomplishment? It's getting to mass scale. Okay, well, what's the big difference? If it's not the cars, what allows them to get them to mass scale? Well, I'll tell you, it's the most important product Tesla has. It is the product they have that nobody can buy. It's the factories. It's the gigafactories. To quote Elon, I lived in the Fremont and Nevada factories for 3 years fixing the production line. Fixing it. According to him, everything was wrong. Everything was messed up. None of it was efficient. There were just too many bottlenecks. And so he spent 3 years in Nevada and Fremont working on this. He goes on to say he was living with the team. I slept on the floor so that the team who was going through a hard time could see me on the floor and know that I was not in some ivory tower. That whatever pain they were going through, I was going through the same pain, if not worse. I talk about this all the time. When you invest, you're not really investing into a company, at least not in my opinion, not investing against the grain. You're investing in people. You're investing in leaders. All right, Chamath and Ron Barron, they talk about all the time. They're placing bets not on the company. They're placing their bets on the greatest entrepreneur in our lifetimes, Elon Musk. Look, my greatest investments ever. I've talked about it here. Apple, Amazon, now Tesla. What do they all have in common? Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. Whether you like any of them, respect them, you can't ignore their genius and their success. You're investing in the people. And not just that, you're investing in the teams that they put together. Look at Andy Jassy now with Amazon. Jeff Bezos moves to the side. Andy Jassy steps in. Andy Jassy is regarded as one of the most prolific leaders out there. Look at Apple. Steve Jobs passes away. Tim Cook comes in. Look what's happened to Apple since then. Now, I'm not saying that Apple has innovated as well as Tesla. And I'm not saying that Andy Jassy will be able to do as good of a job as Jeff Bezos did with innovating, creating new ideas, and getting to new business streams. But the point is, they hire good people and they hire a good team, and that's what you're investing in. So, taking it back to Elon sleeping on the floor, because he wanted to make sure that the people that he was going through hell with understood that he was there with them. He wasn't this billionaire rich guy who's going to go back to his penthouse at 4 p.m. and let the team do what they need to do, because at the end of the day, they're his employees and they do what he tells them to do. No, he's down there with them, working late at night, working on the assembly line, with tools in his hand, fixing things, coming up with ideas, whiteboarding. I mean, he's there. He's in the dirt. He's in the heat of battle with them. That is powerful. That is what a good leader does. And that's what you're investing in. That's what I'm investing in. I can't stress this enough. You are investing in leaders and people within companies. All right. If you are only investing based on a P&L sheet, I'm afraid that that's not going to end well in what I've seen with investing. Again, no, this financial advice, just my opinion. giving you a story of what's happening in my life and what I've come to know to be true. Elon goes on to say that at this point, he believes he knows more about manufacturing than any other person alive on Earth because he's gone through this for so long, through so many years. And it's hard not to believe that he's right about this. But this leads into what I think might be the most prolific part of this interview. And I think this is eventually going to lead into Master Plan Part 3. He talks about scale. He says that we essentially need 300 terawatt hours of battery storage in order to replace transport, electricity, heating, and cooling so that we can transition into a sustainable world. He goes on to say that this is just his estimate, 300 terawatt hours, that yes, there may be other estimates. Nobody truly knows until we get there, right? So for anybody who wants to criticize his number here, like, you're fighting against a wall. It's pointless. But what he said here, to me, was the most important thing as an investor, and I think gives us insight into what's coming down the road with regards to Master Plan Part 3. He says, how fast can we scale and encourage others to scale? So what's Tesla going to do? So we are going to try and take a set of actions that's going to accelerate and bring the day of a sustainable future sooner. To me, when I heard him say, I literally rewound it twice. I just got done rewatching the entire interview this morning. I was taking notes. I was listening with more intentionality, right? It's like when you listen to something 2 or 3 times, like you pick up on other things. But the fact that he's so adamant about this 300 terawatt hours, he's talked about Master Plan Part 3. He's talked about the next phase of Tesla is to grow and build at truly massive scale. As if Austin, the biggest factory in the world, wasn't already truly massive scale. What he's saying is that they're going to take a certain set of actions to accelerate. To me, what I think this means is that we now have a foundation of what a gigafactory should look like. I think it started off with Shanghai, right? And of course, from Shanghai to Berlin, Austin, we were able to iterate and get even more learnings. Right now, we have a front rear casting. We have a battery pack, a structural battery pack. But now, they just got done doing 2 factories at the same time. I could see them scaling this, going from they built 1, next they built 2, next they built 4. Who knows what's next? Is next 16? But I could see that the next phase that they go into is building 4 factories at once. Doesn't mean that these will all be gigafactories in terms of producing vehicles, but if the goal is 300 terawatt hours, 2 of these factories may just be battery factories. They may have gotten to a point with the 4680 where they feel like they can truly scale this. Don't forget, Elon did say at Austin that the battery factory built within Austin will eventually be the biggest battery plant in the world. To me, Part 3, what he's talking about here, all of it's starting to connect. All the dots are starting to connect about truly massive scale. Now, if Tesla is thinking about going for truly massive scale, and truly massive scale is even bigger than what they're currently doing, I feel very bad for all of the other OEMs. They are so far behind. And if Tesla's at this point, I think we're really going to start seeing these investments come through. A lot of you have been wondering, what's Tesla going to do with all this cash they're about to stockpile? Are they going to pay a dividend? Are they going to invest into something else? I'll tell you what they're going to invest in, massive scale. Because the more they build, the more they scale out on what they know works and what's functioning, the more that you're just going to see this amplify, and we're going to get closer and closer to a sustainable energy with renewable energy.